Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for making it today for an exciting presentation with Tim Field on landscape recovery. Hope everyone's had a great break and ready for a new year of action and recovery. That was really cheesy. We're having a little technical issue, so I'm going to be running the slides on behalf of Tim, and I'll be doing so blindly. So Tim will be kind enough to let me know if anyone needs admitting, etc. So first I'm going to share the window. Let me know if you can see it, please.
There we go, yep.
Fabulous. And then I will go into presentation mode. Right. Over to you, Tim. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Please do just shout out or stick a hand up or anything at any point if I miss someone trying to get in or if someone's asking a question. And thanks very much, Sarah, for having me to speak. I recognise a couple of names and very nice to see them. Some of you I don't recognise. Very nice to meet you. So I am Tim Field. I am a facilitator of a group of farmers in the Northeast Cotswolds. Before that, I worked for an estate in Gloucestershire for 14 years on land management and sustainability and food supply chains and energy and all sorts of things. And before that, I was an environmental consultant with Royal Haskoning, focusing on freshwater habitats. So that's a little check of the history of me. And today I have been asked to talk about Evenlode Landscape Recovery. It is a particularly well-timed talk. You are the first talk that I'll be giving on this since we signed our landscape recovery implementation agreement. That is actually confidential. We're not really gone out to the wider world with that yet, but in due course, I mean, it's not particularly hot news, but it will be released formally. So landscape recovery, we are part of the first round of pilots that were started 3 years ago. There were 22 pilots 3 years ago. There's another 33 the year after in round 2. So far, only 3 of us have got over the line through that development phase and into an implementation agreement. There were a couple that signed off last year, and we're the third. We can talk a bit more about that later, but I think probably what's most important is understanding, or my understanding of the brief today is to explain how we got to landscape recovery and how we've approached it as a group of farms. And so perhaps if I set the scene about what the farmer group is and how we came about, and then I'll go into the nuts and bolts of landscape recovery. So yeah, next slide, please, Sarah.
I'm sorry, 1 second.
There we go. So we started about 5 years ago, focused around sort of Lyneham and Kingham and that sort of area in the middle of the River Evenlode, with a group of enthusiastic farms that wanted to do more together, particularly around water environments and species-rich meadows. Meanwhile, there were a few that were also trying to shorten food supply chains. Oh, I've got something in the chat. Sorry. Would it be possible to let Jennifer Lannon into the call? Okay. Yeah, Sarah, could you let Jennifer in, please?
I'll do that, but I'll have to stop sharing. I'm sorry, everyone. 1 second.
I will fill that time. So yeah, we set up in the Evenlode area, but then there was a group on the Windrush and the Evenlode that also wanted to shorten food supply chains and work more collaboratively at markets as well. And before we knew it, we were a couple of hundred farms across the 57,000 hectares. And that map sort of shows where sort of middle and lower reaches of the Windrush, and more recently into the Cherwell as well. Actually, that's a bit of an old map. There's a bit more coverage in the Cherwell. So we occupy the Evenlode, the Windrush, and the Cherwell, and we set ourselves up with objectives around knowledge exchange and sharing best practice, but also to start to develop projects together as well. The objectives were around soil health and accessing new markets, understanding the new elms as it was 5 years ago, and innovation and entrepreneurialism, supporting that, and a fifth objective around blended finance, private and public funding, and then sixth objective around social engagement and engaging with communities. So that's how we set up 5 years ago, in community interest company. Next slide, please, Sarah. Oh, you can't hear me. Emma, can you hear me? Can anyone else not hear me?
I can hear you, Tim. I can hear you fine.
Good, Jenny. Thank you. Good. Emma, I suspect it might be at your end, not on the call. Maybe drop off and or try your tech again. Sorry about that. So over that course of the last 5 years, we've done all sorts of projects together as well. We started, as I say, around Lynham with a group of 4 farms that sort of connected up their habitats around one particular stream. The knowledge exchange, we tapped into the Cotswolds Stewardship Facilitation Fund as it was. Unfortunately, that ended last June, but we're hopeful that we can get into this new round that's coming out this summer. At the same time, I was working with the guys at Rothamsted Research Institute, and developing a bit of technology in a stratified sampling method for efficient soil carbon testing at a landscape scale. So looking at land use, method of analysis, depth, soil type, and so on, and then stratifying that so you get the statistically significant soil carbon stock across a landscape. We did supplementary bird feeding, and then landscape recovery opened up about 4 years ago for entrance. We had sufficient membership interest. We also had the Evenlode Catchment Partnership, who was very active, had been very active for the last 10 years, had already done some sort of flood reduction projects, a little bit of habitat work. So there are a few case studies, but also quite importantly, some natural flood management optioneering or modeling called NFM Studio with Atkins. So that gave us a bit of an impetus to go for landscape recovery. Meanwhile, on the Windrush, we also did some baseline in floodplain meadows. We've done deer projects. We've done reached out to our members and collaborated with a very enthusiastic group to pick up where the Long Compton abattoir failed and start a farmer-led abattoir locally. So on to the next slide, please. This is a little clip from the natural flood management studio that I mentioned Atkins did. This is actually on the Cherwell. I couldn't find the slide which I've got for the Evenlode, but it's exactly the same. What we've done now is actually got funding for the for Cherwell. The Cotswold Rivers Trust have got funding for the Windrush. The ECP got funding for the Evenlode, and so the 3 catchments are all modelled in the same way for identifying opportunities for natural flood management, focusing floodplain reconnection efforts. There's some baseline data on habitats, and there is surface flow erosion risk and all sorts of other things. So this is all in the public domain now, and it's there's a link on our website. So that helped us give this focus on slowing water as well. Next slide, please. We have got a lot of data, so that link with the Rothamsted Research Institute and a group of 45 odd farms meant that we could go out and do this landscape recovery, landscape scale soil carbon analysis, and we collected data on about 18,000 hectares, covering those 21 soil types that you see there. So that gives us a really solid baseline. Next slide, please. And we've used that to parameterize the natural flood management NFM Studio Atkins work, and try and calculate what the impact of improvements in soil health, soil organic matter particularly, but also land use change, so from arable to grassland, and what the impact that is on the hydrograph and the water carrying capacity of the landscape, so also drought resilience. And that was something that was funded by the Environment Agency through the Regional Coastal Flood Committee, whatever it's called. Anyway, next slide, please. Importantly, that last slide, sorry, that it also gave us some robust data on what would happen to our carbon stocks if we went into a land use change. So then we started drilling into a few opportunities where this could be deployed, and the Evenlode's in that sort of between zone of the beautiful Windrush, where you've got lots of grassy floodplains and beautiful floodplain meadow fields and lovely calcareous grasslands, and then perhaps slightly more productive or intensive arable systems to the west as well, to the east. And so historically, the Evenlode has been dredged and straightened, and still it has been, I think it's still been cropped in the floodplain, and that's created all sorts of issues with water quality and flooding and all sorts of habitat loss and everything else. But it's not very efficient agriculture. Most of the topsoil seems to be disappearing downstream and ending up down in the River Thames. So what the answers are obvious. We need to change land use, but farms have mortgages to pay, they have combines to make work, they have systems of agriculture that they're fairly entrenched in and dependent on. So we need to give them the route out for some of these sort of large scale shifts in land use and opportunities to break free of the doom loop of losing crops downstream. Next slide, please. And so that's where landscape recovery for us made sense, trying to find those 10 or 15% of the farm that are least productive or most in need of rehabilitation, connecting existing land habitats, but also opportunities to intercept surface flow in flow pathways, reconnect the river where it's really begging to be done and is flooding anyway. And so we tested this principle. Once we've got awarded the landscape recovery project, we tested this principle on one particular field just downstream of Lynham, and it sort of exemplifies what we're about. You know, lots of opportunities going begging, and that sort of slide explains it. So, you know, you can see the plumes of sediment that have come down and washed out in a sort of delta in the middle of the field. The previous slide showed some scar in that field. You know, this is doing nothing for the ecological health of the river, but it's also doing nothing for flood storage and reducing the energy in the river in these peak flows. So we thought, you know, let's start here and test what we could do and then build out from that. So next slide, please. And of course, it's not just about what happens in the floodplain, because once the water's in the floodplain, it's kind of too late to reduce flooding. So it's all the way up the slopes, and as I say, connecting existing habitats. So we targeted sort of a dozen habitat types. Of course, river restoration is in there, but the mosaic and really sort of looking at that ecotone from one habitat to the next, to the next, to the next, through the landscape, and every opportunity we could to try and get the water going, infiltrating down and getting stored in that landscape rather than rushing into the river and firing downstream and creating all sorts of havoc and flood events, as well as using these systems to obviously reduce the amount of pollution going into the system, but also acting as the liver and the kidneys of our landscape as well, because we know the water quality in the system is dreadful. So next slide. And that's how it sort of fits into the landscape. We have engaged with about 80 odd farms through the process, of which I think 75 we drafted plans for. And as I say, there's about on average about 15% of each farm we've developed a plan to go into landscape recovery. The inevitable contract came back after 3 years of development from DEFRA, and it's no secret that a lot of organisations have found it very hard to swallow. There is a lot of opportunity for DEFRA to claw back and risk of default by the participants. Legally, all the cards were held by DEFRA, and so it was a bit of a one-sided contract. We have made it work, but inevitably we have lost farms on the way. So developing 75 odd farm land management plans, we're down to 55 now signed. So we've had a haircut, but we have still got 3,000 hectares on that map in the landscape recovery project. As I say, they're really targeting floodplains, but also steep slopes, intercepting flow pathways, and the tributaries all the way through the system. So you can see the sort of coverage. The source of the Evenlode, if you're not aware, is up by Morton Marsh, and then it joins the Thames just northwest of Oxford. So next slide, please. And to give you an idea of, I mean, it's very much just chucked a couple of photos on the slide deck. Apologies for that, but you can get an impression of what we're trying to do through this. That photo in the middle of the arable cultivated soil, a horrible flow pathway cutting straight through the middle. Actually, we resolved that particular problem by putting a field corner bund, just a small field corner bund in the top left of the picture, which was intercepting the surface flow that was actually creating the overtopping of a ditch and the infrastructure that was causing that scar. So very, very simple measures that most farms can do, or their neighbour can do on their farm, with a digger and a bit of common sense and a site level. So some really practical solutions that we can deliver ourselves, and through to slightly more ambitious schemes like the River Dawn here in the bottom left, which is on the Blenheim estate, and plenty of you I'm sure have been made aware of this. It's a sort of stage 0 type. It's not a full stage 0 in that the old channel hasn't been filled in, but it's letting the water do the work, and some analog beaver dams put in, so lots of woody debris put into the main channel, pushing the water out for half of the year, and letting the energy of that flood event, or for 50% of the time, run through the flood zone and actually start to create multi-thread channels down the floodplain. And that in itself is helping filter out all the sediment. Most of the sediment loading is in 80% of is in those peak events when we're overtopping the banks anyway. So allowing that sediment to fall out, but also creating some wonderful wetland mosaic habitat in the flood zone. Graze sensitively and carefully, so you're not overgrazing, poaching, or anything else. But also, actually, as Blenheim found, in a drought year, that becomes some of the only grass that stands, and so it's sort of building resilience in the estate as well. On the right, that's a sketch of a new project that we've just been working on. Alex Ward at Cornwell on the Cornwell Brook, just upstream from Bledington. It's I think this is probably about the sort of 5th phase of his lifetime's work on the stream. He started about 20 years ago with a great wetland creation that actually I copied for a different scheme. And then he's got into an environment bank scheme as well further upstream. More recently, he had funding from Thames Water, the Environment Agency, and FIPL to do a a project with Evenlode Catchment Partnership on three reaches of the Chipping Norton Brook, floodplain reconnections and restoration of sort of rewiggling. But this section involves his neighbour as well, and he always wanted to do something on it, but he couldn't because he didn't have both banks. Now we have both banks in landscape recovery as neighbour as well. We've looked at the opportunities here, and there are so many to improve the flow, sinuosity, and the diversity, as well as reconnecting the floodplain, absorbing those shock of flood events, and creating some wonderful habitat. But perhaps just as importantly is at the bottom of that stretch, down the bottom left of the picture, is a SSEN, Scottish and Southern Electric Networks substation, which feeds a lot of the local district network, and a Thames Water sewage pumping station. So two quite vulnerable pieces of equipment and assets right in the flood zone that do get their toes wet when it floods. Next slide, please. So we've been developing those case studies and those concepts all over the catchment with the farms over the last couple of years. What the farmer wants to put where they see these field corners getting wet and needing to hold back water, but also working with partners to identify those opportunities to connect habitats and also protect assets. How have we done this on the ground? Well, the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster Community Interest Company, which is the not-for-profit entity that we set up 5 years ago, was brilliant at getting grant funding in, and it was brilliant as a vehicle to give the members ownership of the group and the organisation. It was less useful as an entity to contract with big schemes and receive investment and administer investment. So we looked at creating a special purpose vehicle to do that and setting up a new company. This is a bit of a complicated slide, but basically what we've got there in the middle is this Evenlode Landscape Recovery special purpose vehicle. That is the entity that contracts the farmers to do the work on the ground. It contracts with DEFRA to receive the funding and provide the outcomes that we're being funded from. It enables us to transact the outcomes with buyers and off-takers, be it carbon or BNG or natural flood management or water quality or any other ecosystem benefits that the region would like. But most importantly, it enables us to disseminate the funds that we generate through the nature-based solutions and disseminate them equitably across the participating landowners. There are a couple of different structures out there that others have employed, like the Environmental Farmers Group, so that you have a sort of profit share type model. We were very keen to give everyone an opportunity to get into this, whether you're a tenant, whether you are a landowner, whether you've got masses of opportunity to do huge restoration works because your farm is dreadful, or conversely, your farm is amazing because you've done all this work already, but you feel robbed because you can't get into BNG because you've got nowhere to go in terms of headroom. So we wanted to create a vehicle where everyone was rewarded for the work they've done or the work they're going to do, and it worked for the farm business as well. So everyone gets an equal cut, equal hectare payment. And then once we've paid back so in this model, we've gone out for capital investment, both through debt and equity into the vehicle. DEFRA are participating in that debt as well. So we have a loan from DEFRA to pay for planting trees and for rewiggling rivers and so on. And over time, we will pay that back based on the carbon that we generate and sell, or the assets that we're protecting through NFM and so on and so forth. So the vehicle is taking that investment. Each landowner is a shareholder in the entity. Each hectare is a share, and then those profits are disseminated back as dividends to the landowners. We also have DEFRA. This is probably a good opportunity to explain how we structured with DEFRA. So I mentioned the loan for the capital works. the capital works are done in the first 5 years. In that period, we're not actually arguably creating any nature-based solutions yet. So we have what's called a conversion payment. So DEFRA are paying for a conversion payment on a hectare basis. And then once we're into year 6 to 20, they are paying for a habitat condition payment, which is akin to the BNG metric. So we basically doing BNG condition assessments, and assuming that we get to the next sort of from poor to moderate or moderate to good over the period of 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we will unlock the payments for the condition of those habitats from DEFRA. So we get a hectare payment from that as well. Or different habitats will generate different amounts, but as I said earlier, we chuck it all in the pot and it all gets distributed equally. We also have these natural capital markets being developed, whether that's natural flood management, water quality, carbon, BNG. Now, BNG is exclusively outside of the public funded pot for the additionality reasons. But the other three, carbon, natural flood management, and water quality, we have asked DEFRA to underwrite those markets to effectively catalyze them in the early days. So we've got a 40% market underwrite of the value of the nature-based solutions we're providing on NFM, water quality, and carbon. The carbon one actually is nowhere near 40%. It's just a bit of a token, but at least it shows that that DEFRA will participate in the market if no one else does, basically, and that enables us to get the confidence of external investors to come in. We've had a bit of philanthropy as well to try and move the social outcomes, and we've already been engaging with the buyers of natural capital as well to bring in revenue. So next slide, please. And here we go. These are the sort of off-takers that we've been working with. The perhaps most important ones more recently are the penultimate one, the enabling climate resilient utilities and infrastructure, what the buyers want. This is a NERF 3, Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, round 3 project. We did with Great Yellow, who are our blended finance consultants on the landscape recovery project as well. And it's a shame Jennifer is just dropping off, but what does Thames Water want out of the landscape? They obviously want clean water, and they want to be able to treat their water as well. It costs an awful lot of money to clean the water when it gets to far more reservoir, filthy and loaded with phosphates and nitrates and sediments. So there are cost savings to their business from us doing what we do. Network Rail, the Cotswold line crosses the Evenlode 27 odd times, and every time it crosses, it gets hammered by the flood events. It's very vulnerable infrastructure in these flood events. So anything that we can do to reduce the burden of maintenance on culverts, or reduce scour at the point that river hits the embankment, or just enable the maintenance crews get on site to fix problems when they occur. So there's lots of different ways that the local stakeholders want to engage with the landscape. Scottish and Southern, I mentioned substations. Oxfordshire County Council, obviously responsible for all sorts of different infrastructure in the county. So off the back of that, and some earlier work with Network Rail, particularly on the tree planting, we've actually just secured 2.5 million in offtake with one of those parties, to be disclosed formally in due course. But we are working on all 3 of the others. So actually, Oxfordshire County Council have come to the party as well with a natural flood management scheme, albeit quite a small one, but protecting a little community in Lynham. So Network Rail have funded heavily a particularly vulnerable scar point, and the one field example I showed earlier, they are really leaning into that particular area of the river because of the scar point. So we're developing that as a pilot. Thames Water have got their vulnerabilities, and surface water is a big priority for them, as well as treatment at the other end. So collectively, between those 4 stakeholders and lots of others, we've got house builders wanting to offset some carbon, and so on and so forth, as well as actually the banks that we're borrowing from have their own are participating in the markets in their own way, and effectively would like to participate in as a buyer as well as a lender. So there's an awful lot of activity out there, and we're just beginning to get those contracts lined up now to get it working. Next slide, please. So that's really where I might sort of draw to an end, because I've sort of waffled through the pipeline and pipe dreams that we've got to restore the landscape, farm by farm, connecting hedgerow to hedgerow, and river restoration, reconnection to the floodplain. It's all very well. We know the DEFRA purse strings are very tight and very complicated to untie and get anything out of. So we cannot rely just on DEFRA and public money. There's just not enough money to go around to deal with the nature crisis and other climate crisis and everything else that we've got on our plate. So we have to get these collaborations moving. And I think, well, the Lynham project I mentioned, Oxfordshire County Council funding, will undoubtedly reduce the risk of that left-hand photo happening again. That is a substation in Lynham, and that's not a river, that is a footpath. And on the right-hand side, that picture is actually from 2007, but it's quite dramatic, and that is the Cotswold line just at, I think that one's at Ascot under Wychwood, but this happened several places along the Evenlode catchment. So there's real evidence that we can shift the dial with these sorts of climate risks, and they are all ears. It's just trying to shift the dial in their thinking from sort of 5-year control periods or 5-year AMP cycles, and that's asset management, the funding finance cycles, to thinking about these nature-based solutions and these a natural capital as an asset class that can be invested in over not just 5 years, but 10, 15, 20, generations. Consider it like a railway station. Think about this nature infrastructure, woodlands on steep slopes, that sort of thing, as protection for society in so many different ways. And so that is the big next move. We've got the markets moving with a couple of contracts, as I mentioned, but we've got plenty more that we need to generate. And so we'll be tackling not just BNG and carbon, but these other markets as well over time. And I think that is it. So next slide is basically what we drafted in a room together. A bunch of farms said, what do we want out of landscape recovery? What do we want out of the farmer group? What do you want over the next generation of the Cotswolds, and what does it need to provide? And landscape recovery is a real thread through this vision. But importantly, this is not a single estate that's put a massive fence around the edge to go and rewild it and I hope that food still comes from somewhere else. This is very much about the shift to native breeds, the shift to restoring and floristically enhancing meadows. And actually, by sacrificing 10 or 15%, you can make the rest of the farm more resilient. Whether that is by that field corner pond, just stopping the scour going through the arable field and the slide I showed earlier, or just shifting from an incredibly loss-making floodplain arable field into a profit-making, nature-restoring floodplain meadow. So I think I'll stop there. But please do fire away at questions and clarifications or comments.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was wonderful. Yeah, we'll just move on to the Q&A section now. If anyone has any questions for Tim, got about 10 more minutes to go or less. Don't be shy.
Hang on. I have a question. Hi, Tim. It's
Hi,
Jen
Jenny.
here. Hello. Sorry, I've been out in the rain getting my horses in because it was pouring with rain. So apologies, I'm a bit drowned. Yeah, I had a question about you were saying about the condition payment for 5 years. Sorry, the condition sort of getting to condition payment for 5 years and
Conversion
then
payment, yeah.
conversion payment. Thank you.
Mm.
And then going to a condition payment. What happens if you don't reach the condition?
So
Does the conversion payment carry on, or do they, or haven't they decided that yet?
no. Good question. Very good question. So the conversion payment ends after year 5.
Yeah.
And then we go into every 5 years we have our habitat conditions scored.
Yeah.
There is a risk that you don't hit the score that we think we're going to get.
Yeah.
And so therefore, yes, you do not get the full payment on that particular parcel. But what we've desperately tried to do with DEFRA, and this is a proper finger in the air, but hopefully we've got it roundabout right, is not be too ambitious and be quite conservative about what we're going to achieve when and how quickly we'll get there. And there will be some parcels, yes, we don't achieve that condition, but there hopefully will be others that will overshoot, and it's a net position. So we can overshoot on some, undershoot on others, and the net is across the 3,000 hectares will have achieved the condition that we need to, and that's why we get the money into a pot and then we disseminate it. But to give us ground cover on that, we have step-in rights to, if the farm isn't managing it the way that it needs to be managed, and we've done everything that we can to encourage the right way to manage it. It might be that they've had to sell all the stock, or they haven't got the equipment. We can help in so many different ways to make sure that habitat is created in the right way. If that still isn't working, in collaboration with the farmer, we do have the right to step in and manage that parcel to achieve the outcomes that are required. And that is merely us passing on that step-in right from DEFRA. So DEFRA have insisted that they have the right to step in. So we basically have adopted that to pass to step in and achieve what needs to be achieved.
That's brilliant. Can I just ask one, unless somebody else wants to ask a question, can I just ask about force majeure? So what happens if you have a sort of like a continuous flood or continuous drought that prevents you getting to that habitat quality that you've agreed that you're going to achieve? Is there something in there for that as well?
Yeah, there is force majeure. And there's an acknowledgement that things can happen, but we've also had to demonstrate how we can mitigate fire, flood, drought, and everything else. And we've got a 5-year period to be planting or to achieve these outcomes. And annoyingly, to unlock payments, we actually are having to ask for that payment and budget it and evidence it every single quarter. It makes the RPA look like a breeze, I can tell you.
Oh my God.
You're
so brave to be trailblazing like this. Well done.
I tell you what, we are going to be, we've just got to get on and do it to start, but we are really campaigning to release that to annual evidencing and annual budgeting, because you can't predict what the weather's going to do, and you don't want to just be shoving the trees in the ground just because you need to show the evidence that that's what you've done with the money.
Yeah.
You just got to hold off if it's gone dry or gone cold or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Any further questions from anyone? Got a few minutes left. Hi, Damien.
I've got a question for is anyone else involved in any landscape recovery projects? I mean, Jenny, you're involved in all sorts of things, I know, and the hillscapes and all sorts, but anyone else? No. Well, I think there's 3 that have dropped by the wayside now. There's 3 that are now over the line, and then there's whatever there's 49 others out there in varying degrees of stress. But I really do encourage it as a goal. I'd love to think that we can expand the Evenlode project out into Cherwell and Windrush, because it just seems like we need to be more committed to longer term funding and longer term sort of reward, if you like, for land use change where it's most appropriate. And so I feel this is quite a useful vehicle to do that.
Tim, Damien Crilly from
Hi,
the
Damien.
Environment Agency. Hi, I'm particularly interested in the slide that you showed us with the stakeholders and partners, primarily from the perspective of who's a likely investor or a buyer of a service that you're providing, beyond the usual suspects of the infrastructure providers or utilities. Are you seeing any other private sector investors appearing?
So investors in terms of buyers, off takers, yes. Interesting. I had a good chat with the Great Yellow, Ed Dick from Great Yellow yesterday, about natural flood management is a real tough nut to crack, as I'm sure you will be only too aware. But what is emerging is the data centers need for water, and so almost the inverse of natural flood management, water resilience and water storage being a potential market, the data centers being a potential market player in activities up catchment to maintain that flow through drought years. But where else? I mean, I know I'll drop off this call and I'll think of them all, but
it's no rush. The contact we have on the NERF project, Andy Slaney, who I'm sure you probably know.
Yes, I know very well.
If I could work through him, if they come to mind, just pop them up to Andy and I'll check in with him.
Yeah, it's
I
a
could
good question.
make a contribution there.
Yeah.
I work with Andy all the time, and we're looking at the sort of other beneficiaries that we're looking at are asset holders, like a bit like Tim, but people like Tesco's, Aldi, people like that who've got physical assets, and that's through our NERF project with Andy Slaney. So
Right.
I'll catch up with Tim afterwards because there's a lot to catch up on.
Thanks, Jenny. Thank you.
Yeah, our NERF project on the Cherwell did get 3 keel to do a bit of horizon scanning. Jenny's work on this is much more mature than ours, but I think 3 keel did struggle a little bit in the Cherwell to find other players. But I know Jenny's been doing some great work on to the west of us and or southwest, and I mean the other investors in terms of equity are Rebalance Earth, who have been doing a lot of work in this space, and again Jenny's been working with them as well as us, and they've done some great work in Manchester, and how pension funds can be deployed to effectively protect the assets of those that are putting their pensions in. So there's something very circular and tidy about that. And then as I mentioned, NatWest on the carbon side have been very helpful as well in helping us sort of develop high credibility carbon.
Right, thank you.
Then we've got a message from Freddie Collins, not one that I've been involved in, but being a catchment rep in London Lee has led me to Enfield Chase Landscape Recovery Program, and he included a link in the chat to that. Do you want to add anything more to that, Freddie?
Nothing really specific. It's just I've been looking into it quite a bit. It seems like it's been a really successful project. Something I'm hoping to get more involved in, as I've only been at the company for quite a short period of time. But yeah, just thought it would be a useful link to put in there if someone wanted to look at some other examples of landscape recovery programs, especially in like London. It's quite a kind of different project. You have to go different boundaries about getting access to that sort of land. But yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken to them, and they're doing some great work there. I'm not quite sure where they're at in terms of going to implementation, but it's a brilliant project. The other one, you just prompted me, the other one in the Thames Valley is the Tamenok, which is very expansive, covering 2 catchments, but also 8,000 odd hectares. So that's another really interesting one to watch, and it's quite similar to ours in terms of trying to get small parts of lots of farms engaged. They've in terms of the round 2 projects have to account for food production as well, and they've actually got arable coming into it as well, so they've got low input arable as part of their package. I don't know how they're dressing it up. Every project will be disseminating funds differently. I'm not sure how they're going to tackle that, but it is interesting. I'm going to go back quickly to Damien's question, if I may, because of course you're from the Environment Agency, and the Environment Agency are of course a potential buyer and off-taker. And I have had a couple of conversations, and I should flag this. With the schemes that are going on, particularly around the edge of Oxford, rumour has it that there were some woodland BNG units required, and the Environment duly delivered because there was nothing local, and so they managed to buy some from Yorkshire, and that's exactly what we're trying to avoid, and that's what a couple of your colleagues that I've spoken to in the region are trying to avoid, is this sort of unstrategic purchasing of things like BNG or carbon, where if you look at where we're putting BNG, and we're not generating BNG on everything, it's we're going to do a market analysis, and we'll do some river units, some hedgerows, some this, that, and the other, but not all neutral grassland because the market's saturated in that. And actually have not just a BNG unit, but a BNG unit that's strategically placed to improve flood attenuation, water quality, and so on and so forth, so that and also fits with the Environment Agency's own river Evenlode restoration strategy. So we're urging all buyers to think strategically and locally around BNG as well, and hopefully persuade not more participants in creating banks, but use the BNG banks that are there in our part of the world. It's the Trust for Oxfordshire Environment, it's BBOUT, it's us, and then as a last resort you go to the Environment Bank if you because really you should be able to buy it locally. But the Environment Bank are very good at doing what they're doing, and creating the bank for reserve, if you like. So there are places to go for BNG, and we should be really looking at that strategically and not just as a last resort.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I'm well aware we've gone over time, but thank you for hanging in there. That's a really good sign. Tim, as ever, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, and I'm sure if anyone has any further questions that they can think of afterwards, we'll send you a quick message or email. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll speak soon. Take care.
Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.